Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I am Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, all the places at Hawk Blogger, and we are charging towards episode 365. That will be 365 straight days of Hawk Blogger Mornings and fresh Seahawks content for you. And this month has been the best of all the months so far. Tons of folks joining. We are closing in on 17,000 subscribers. Let me check the latest numbers. We are... My goodness, we are 43 subscribers away from 17,000 subscribers. So keep on coming, click subscribe, click like, get in on the fam. Also, great time to join as a member, club level or higher on YouTube, or just go over to patreon.com/hawkblogger and you'll get access to the Discord channel where there are hundreds of folks talking about the Seahawks, talking about all sorts of things in between each show. So great time to join the party. This episode this morning is jam-packed. We are going to start with listening to some of DK Metcalf's words from the Get Got podcast with Marshawn Lynch and kind of react to, and obviously Mike Robb as well, to some of the things that DK Metcalf said. So we'll listen to that first. We will welcome in Bobby Peters, who I asked our good pal, Coach. I asked our good pal, the coach on the defensive side, Mr. Cody Alexander, who he would recommend to give us a view on the other side of the ball. And he pointed to Bobby Peters, who has written multiple books on the Klint Kubiak offense, on the offense that comes out of this scheme. And we're going to talk to him in just about 10 minutes. And then I'm also going to play some sound from John Schneider. We're going to react to that as well. So we've got a lot to do, a little time to do it. So let's jump right in. Yesterday, I think the meaningful story that came out was, or at least that got a lot of play, was DK Metcalf appearing on the Get Got pod. And he talked about a lot of things, but I think the thing that kind of stood out to me was the conversation about the Ryan Grubb situation, as well as just his time here in Seattle and wanting to be loyal, but also just saying goodbye. And so the first the first bit that I wanted to play was him talking about the importance of loyalty to him. And I think it was a good look inside of kind of DK's mindset and what makes him tick. And overall, highly recommend listening to the pod if you didn't listen to it, because you got a different side of DK Metcalf. He was disarmed. He was at ease. And you could tell the respect he has for the guys he's talking to. And I think that's part of the magic of that podcast is people have so much respect for Marshawn Lynch that you see a side of them that you won't see elsewhere, because he's not going to... Marshawn does not want a glossy view. So here is DK Metcalf answering a question from Marshawn Lynch.
Way, but is that something that you would have wanted to do?
Of course, loyalty is a big thing to me. So, I mean, I committed to Ole Miss in 9th grade, and I stuck that whole thing out. So,
for real, bro.
Loyalty is a big thing for me. Being loyal to lot, Bobby.
You fix this thing.
Not even just.
That's Marshawn Lynch trying to get his technical fix. It was
not even just like the team aspect, but being loyal to your teammates. Like when you walk on the field, I got your back, bro. Like I ain't gonna let nobody mess over you. Like if I see some extra stuff going on, like with Locke or Bobby or Russ, then I'm gonna go insert myself because that's my brother. Like I feel loyal to you. Like I feel like it's an obligation to look out for you, to be your extra set of eyes on the field. So I'm not just talking about loyalty to a team. I'm talking about loyalty to everything I put my heart into. When I'm working out, I'm not just working out for myself or for myself to look good. Like I got to work out to make sure I'm there for my brothers on Sunday, to make sure, I can do my job to the best of my ability when I'm studying film. So loyalty just goes further than putting on a jersey for me. Like it's just being there for your teammates no matter what. So
he goes on there, but I thought that was a great look inside DK's head. And I think DK gets a raw deal from probably a lot of us on the outside that don't get to see him when he's in this form versus his kind of like putting on the armor for dealing with the press or fans or things of that nature. And you see that, and I mean, I've seen that. I've talked to you about, like, the most excited I've ever seen DK Metcalf in his entire career is when his brothers are scoring touchdowns, when Tyler Lockett's scoring a touchdown, when somebody else is scoring a touchdown, a JSN. I've seen it. I've seen him just like celebrate like he celebrates no other time. Definitely more than when he scores or when he makes a play. So I think this is a huge piece of understanding DK Metcalf, is this loyalty piece. And I got to say, I respect it and I feel the same way. And he talks about how it's just not as common anymore and people just don't do that. And I don't know about you all, but in my lifetime, you know, it has been very challenging to find people that are as loyal to me as I will be to them. And you kind of hear that a little bit in DK Metcalf's voice, that, you know, his experience has been similar. You know, he's very loyal to some folks, and maybe has experienced or has felt like other folks have not been loyal to him. That could be the team, that could be coaches, that could be other players, it could be all sorts of things. But I wanted to play that piece because I think it folds right into this next bit about kind of what sounded like the beginning of the end for him in Seattle. And this is him talking about the kind of infamous play on the sideline when he kind of screamed at Ryan Grubb.
Me and Locke would watch the defense. We watch the DBs. We'll make make notes and send them in the group, in the receiver group message with the quarterbacks and the receiver coach and everybody on Tuesday while they're doing film study and game plan. Me and Locke would take our own time, put the things together, routes we like, weaknesses, strengths of the DBs, and we would send it, hoping that on the game plan
it
meeting
would
on Wednesday,
some of the things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So on that particular day, we were playing 49ers. They got this DB I've been going against since he was with we came in together. He plays for played with the Giants, so I went against him twice already. And then he was with the 49ers. So I'm like, okay, on third down, you have to run past him early because they're just going to sit at the sticks. On 3rd and 4, we call all hitches. Like, that's not running past them. Like, you have to
scare people. On that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He's waiting on it. So when he sat and knocked the ball down, I come to the sideline like, let me just get the headset. Maybe he don't need to hear it from you, or he may have missed the text. So I said, Grubb, can we please run by these guys? Like, they are sitting at the sticks on 3rd down. Like, in order to open up the underneath stuff, they got to be threading deep first. And that was the last week me and Locke did that. That was the last week me and Locke did any extra game
because it wasn't used. I'm putting in all this work, bro. We're the starters too. It ain't like we just some slaps.
And was up there playing checkers.
Yeah, like we were on the field, and people, I don't know if it's like you're supposed to play and we know how to do the work, but like we in the past, even with Russ Tuesday meetings, the player only meeting, like I got used to going to that meeting and like hearing another side, because I knew Russ was in the offensive install meeting. So I got used to hearing that side of the offense, and okay, now Russ is gone. I'm gonna try to help game plan as well. I'm actually on the field running the routes. I'm not no slap. Like, I know what I'm talking about when I'm on the field. And just to not feel reciprocated, that was like the start of Locke was coming to me and like, yeah, bro, I don't think I'm gonna be here next year with the way that they doing me. I'm like, that's my brother. Like, Locke just came off a ban last year. Like, Locke had if not 1,000, it was damn close to it.
Bro, you can almost count 1,000 every single time he out there every season. If he's playing, he gonna get 1,000 yards, bro.
And it's like, I had to sit and watch my brother be told you're not good enough no more.
So I think that was a rough listen, you know, for Seahawks fans, because I think on one hand you've got indication that DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett were doing their best to try to help Ryan Grubb and help the offensive staff figure out what to do, and also combine that with the loyalty thing we just heard about from DK Metcalf and how loyal he is not only to his team but to his teammates and other players. And Tyler Lockett's as close of a relationship as he's got on that team. And to feel like Tyler Lockett's not getting the opportunity to either have input or basically being running routes that, they're basically eliminating routes for him. I think those were the things like he said, and I think it's an important thing to hear there is they stopped after that. They stopped texting in game planning notes. They stopped engaging in the game plan, the offensive game plan. That was pretty early in the season too. And so that was the beginning of the end. And these are the interpersonal things. People talk about X's and O's. They talk about how good you play call in certain situations. They talk about the talent of the players. But if you don't handle the people, if you're not like, everyone's like, you might know this or this, but do you know the X's and O's? And I'm like, well, not as well. I honestly don't. And that's why our next guest will be on here in a second. Will help us with that. But I know people and I know how to lead. And I've done that at various levels. And this is a situation where these guys, some of your best players and some of the leaders in your locker room were not being embraced in the way that they needed to feel like they were part of what was going on. And so those things, more than money, more than a number of other aspects, contribute to an outcome that, maybe the Seahawks didn't want. They wanted DK Metcalf there. If they wanted DK Metcalf there, it was not about an extra $3 million a year. That would have helped, I'm sure. It was about treating Tyler Lockett with respect. It was about, engaging him in the offensive game planning. It was about personal aspects. It was about loyalty, to use DK Metcalf's words. And so I think if I'm John Schneider, if I'm Mike Macdonald, that's what I want to be listening to, is because it's DK Metcalf's gone. This is spilt milk. You're not gonna put it back in the carton at this point. So the lesson that has to be learned is, how are you going to treat JSN? How are you going to treat Devin Witherspoon? How are you going to treat your next era of great players that you don't want to leave because they feel disrespected or because they're not included? And not everybody wants to be included in the game plan. It's not just like do what DK wanted or what Lockett wanted, but you got to get to know the people. Pete used to call it learn the learners. You got to know the people in order to make sure you're doing what you can to keep these guys on the roster. Last thing I'll say before I bring on our guest is, on the flip side, I will give this defense of Ryan Grubb and the coaching staff. All new coaching staff last year. None of them had worked together before. Ryan Grubb was new to the NFL. The only person on the staff he had any connection with was Scott Huff, the offensive line coach. He's got Jake Peets. He's got all these other voices coming together to tell him game planning notes. I'm sure he had Mike Macdonald coming in, giving him game planning notes after things were going the wrong way. And to then have players come in, you got Geno Smith, who also I'm sure had strong opinions, trying to get all those voices, incorporated and felt heard. That's not easy when you're trying yourself. You're swimming and you're probably in over your head a little bit as well. So I don't think this means Ryan Grubb's a bad person or a bad coach. It's a bad look for sure. But I think there are some reasons to kind of understand the human side of what's going on. Now, we'll get back. We'll talk a little bit more about DK Metcalf. We'll talk a little bit more about what John Schneider said in his meeting, his show with Bob and Dave Wyman yesterday. But before we do that, the star of the show, Bobby Peters, who is an accomplished author of multiple books on various aspects of the Kubiak offense, of offense in general, comes to us as a strong recommendation from our good friend Cody Alexander, who's been our defensive guru. And you can find Bobby's books, whether it's, I think the latest is the 2024 Minnesota Vikings Complete Offensive Manual. He's got game planning with the 2024 Green Bay Packers. He's also got a Substack at Alert the Post. And with that, let me bring aboard Bobby Peters to talk to us a little bit about this new Klint Kubiak offense. Bobby, how are you doing today?
Good, Brian. Thanks for having me on.
I'm glad to have you, man. So where are you coming to us from?
The western suburbs of Chicago, Illinois.
All right. And did you grow up a football fan?
Yes, I did. I played all the way through high school, and then my freshman year of college up at University of Wisconsin-Platteville as well, and then had the opportunity to start student coaching up there for at the time minimum wage up there was like $7.25 an hour. So they made that offer, and I said, hey, I can't, broke college kid, can't turn that down. So that's how I started getting into coaching, and then I started doing these manuals relatively seriously back in like 2019. And then every year I try to do a little bit more with them, try to improve them, make the analysis better and make the diagrams better and try to grow that too.
Well, Cody Alexander's a bit of a legend on this show. He's come on a few times and people understand about 10% of what he says, but we get it to where we get up to 50% by the end of the show. But brilliant guy, great guy, and has just taught folks a lot about the defensive side. Talk about, from the offense, what are the aspects that you try to capture in these books? What are the things that you try to focus on as you become kind of an expert on that side of the ball?
So when I sit down and try to write the text for these books, I try to make them for the educated fan, the fan that watches football, is able to pick up and understand what the announcers are saying. But also I want to be able to provide some nuggets in there for coaches, coaches at the high school, college, and even the NFL level, where they can pull stuff out like, wow, okay, I didn't notice that, or that's a critical coaching point for that concept. So I try to strike that line of making it, each section, like in the complete manuals, like I'll break it down by concept. So I'll take a concept. I'll tell the reader what the concept is. I'll draw up all the different variations. I'll show the stats for the team for the season with that concept. And then I'll explain why it worked and why it didn't in those sections, in those two particular back sections, why it worked and why it didn't. I try to get into a little bit more of the nitty gritty coaching points for what we're actually seeing on tape.
What are the coaches interested in? People focus on the fans, and we're going to talk about that in a second, but what are coaches out there trying to learn? What are they focusing on when they're reading your stuff or talking to you about these things?
That's a great question. And I've gotten some different feedback on it. So based on whether it's, I read two different styles of books. So the game planning book, that's more week to week. And I just kind of pick and choose like five or eight different concepts I want to talk about. So in those books, I'm trying to find like unique one-off concepts that they might have game planned for that one week, right? That you might not see the rest of the season. So like trying to find the diamond in the rough, right? For coaches that don't have time to, if you're Kevin O'Connell, right? You're the head coach of the Minnesota Vikings. You don't have time to watch every single, Los Angeles Rams or San Francisco 49er clip during the season. So you need your quality control coaches to provide you, hey, this was a neat concept against this defense, or, and I try to be another resource like that. And that's from those books, that's what they're looking for. When it comes to the manuals and just kind of overall offense, we're all looking for ways to streamline coaching points, right? Like, okay, everybody runs some form of choice. Like choice in the NFL is commonly like a 2-man stack. You got the guy on the ball who's going to run some sort of vertical route, like a corner route. And then the off-ball receiver is going to miss a count at the snap and then run like an option route at about 4 yards. And everybody runs it. But the teams that are really good at it, they seem to have the receivers that run it seem to always understand where to go and where to be. And just the little coaching points and the little things you can pick up on film on those things are kind of the more nuanced elements of what I try to touch on in the books too.
Let's actually zoom in on that for a second. So choice routes, option routes, first for people that aren't familiar, explain what that concept is. And then what are the pieces where, like, give an example of what the receiver is supposed to be looking for, and when they do it right, how that works out.
Yeah. So it's simply put, I was kind of describing it out of a 2-man stack, and that's kind of the main way NFL teams like to do it. Cause like what you're doing is you're creating a free release for that off ball receiver to run the route. So, he releases, he gets to about 4 yards. If there's a soft zone, he can sit down, right? Let's not cover ourselves up. If we're open, we're going to sit down, make ourselves available to the quarterback, whether it's defense is blitzing or they're playing like a Tampa 2 where the zone droppers are getting depth and width. That's typically when the receiver will hitch up there. And then at that same token, he has the ability to break in or out based on, if it's man or match coverage. If he's got a receiver like tucked on his inside hip, he's going to kind of give him a jab step at the top and then break out. Now where it gets really, really fun are receivers like Cooper Kupp, where, if they've got, like a cover 4 overhang who is, high and inside of him, he'll try to cross his leverage. So that defender knows he has help to the outside. So he's going to try to press the receiver to the outside. So he's playing high and inside. But what a receiver like Cooper Kupp will do is he'll jab out and try to cross that defender's face, break his leverage, and try to attack the defense where there is no help, assuming he can beat that defender's leverage. So that's the nuanced element of it that, when you watch a bunch of Rams film, you're like, okay, most teams, when they run this option route, the receiver's going to break out because the defender's inside. Well, Cooper Kupp's trying to break the guy's leverage because there's no help on the inside. There's nobody else in there because the Mike's vacating because it's cover 4, right? The safety's over the top, the corner's outside. So different things like that that's a good example of like taking a concept like choice, understanding the base rules of it, and then understanding why someone like Cooper Kupp excels at it because they take it to a whole nother level.
We'll want to talk definitely a little bit more about Cooper Kupp, the new Seahawk, and just to help people, who aren't as familiar with these terms. So when you're talking about leverage, if a corner is playing, outside leverage, that they are on the outside shoulder of the receiver, they're forcing him toward the inside of if you play basketball, it's common as well, forcing someone to their left hand to their right hand, you're kind of overplaying in one direction to force the person the other direction. And you're talking about in those situations, Cooper Kupp being one of the receivers who does something that kind of breaks convention, and he sees that the person's trying to force him one direction, and he's like, screw that. I'm going to actually make a move that's going to cross in front of you and actually beat you to the side that you're trying to deny me because there's no other defender sitting there. So that's something that's unique to him. Who are kind of the best receivers? You mentioned Cooper Kupp. Who are some of the receivers that stand out from your study in that regard?
Ooh, definitely. So Cooper Kupp, definitely, he's got a few routes that he's particularly well-versed in, and the choice route is one of them. I remember when I did when I studied the 2020 Green Bay Packers, I think that was Aaron Rodgers' first MVP season after LaFleur took over. They featured Davante Adams in a way that I haven't really seen from a lot of the other studies I've done, in the sense that they always made him the first read in the progression, and he was always able to win one-on-one matchups, regardless of what concept they were running. That was a fun study, and Davante had a tremendous season that season from that aspect. And then I've done 3 books now on the Miami Dolphins, and even going back to my first one I did on 2022, and I did the full manual on them, the different ways they try to push the ball down the field with guys like Tyreek Hill and Jaden Waddle. When you've got speed like that, right, you want to take full advantage of it. And the way they kind of design different unique downfield shot plays off of that were fun to study.
It's interesting you mentioned Davante Adams and Cooper Kupp as your first two, as those guys kind of swapped places, with Davante Adams going into the Rams and Cooper Kupp exiting. I'm curious, like, Klint Kubiak is the new offensive coordinator for the Seahawks, and obviously comes from a long lineage of that offensive tree. Got some questions there about what you've learned about that offensive system. I have some questions for you specifically about Kubiak, and also want to get in a little bit about the run game as well, and what to expect there. So, first, for people that are getting accustomed, they've heard the outside zone is part of this. They've talked about under center a little bit more, play action. What do you think of like the hallmarks of the Kubiak offense?
When you look back, the Shanahan roots of the system, right? You look at the use of the fullback, and that's relatively unique in the NFL world, and the different ways they use him in the run game. When we understand, okay, yeah, we hear the idea of a fullback, it's unique, but what does it mean? What does it actually do for the offense? Well, when you're running the ball, defenses, and Cody probably could break this down even better than me, is defenders have, especially like out of a single high defense, they have a single gap that they're assigned to, right? So like you have a defensive end who's in the C gap, you've got a linebacker for the B gap, you've got a nose for the weak A gap, or whatever, right? When you insert a fullback, okay, now as an offense, if you're running like a lead zone play, now you have a blocker for that defender in the B gap for that linebacker. So now the Mike, who's in the opposite A, has to scrape over, or a safety has to fit to be that extra unblocked defender to make the tackle. So what you're really doing is you're creating extra post-snap gaps for the offense, and it puts a lot of strain on linebackers and secondary players to understand their run fits. So that's in the run game. That's something that it really stresses defense with. And then on the other side of that coin is if these linebackers are so worried about these extra responsibilities in the run game, their mind is less focused on, okay, am I going to get beat over the top with play action? Am I going to get a ball whizzing behind my ear hole on like a dig route or something? So with that extra focus on trying to defend all these different run game variations with a fullback, now they're more susceptible to play action. So that's kind of how like the philosophy on how it all works. And then that's taking kind of that general view of it. But then specifically what what those offenses have done for so long and what have made them successful in the run game is the different run game variations that they have. They're multiple within their zone. And then Kyle Shanahan's even gotten more multiple in the gap schemes that he's been running the last few years. But being multiple enough in that zone world where they have answers for the different looks that they're getting, and they're always giving their offensive linemen good leverage.
When you talk about Kyle Shanahan, and then you talk about Klint Kubiak, what are some of the things you might notice as similarities? Where are there maybe some differences between how they run their offenses?
So Kyle's had the benefit of growing his system for years, right? He's developed it, and every year, he's got a lot of turnover, but it's still his baby. In the pass game, they're trying different things. They're experimenting with different variations of base concepts like choice we talked about. Like there's, especially in my more recent 49ers books, I talk about some of the advanced variations they're running, the different backside tags. Like you get into the real fun stuff with that. With Kubiak, it's more you get the base, right? You get the early camp install stuff, which is fine. He's not he hasn't been doing it as long as Kyle, right? And like you have to master those basics before you can. If you've got guys that understand it and have been in the system for years, like a George Kittle, okay, now you can run the advanced stuff. So they're just kind of at different levels of the system.
Do you think that's more about him, or more the fact that he needs more time with it, or is it the fact that he's had 1 year in each of the spots where he's been OC and hasn't been able to get to the next level of install with the same players?
A little of both. It definitely takes time. Like myself as a football coach, you can't come in year one and run, like the 4,000 level stuff. It's you gotta start, you gotta build the foundation. Your players have to understand, even at the NFL level, players have to understand a foundation. And then the next year you can kind of build on that. Okay, how do defenses stop this variation of choice? Well, this is what we're going to do to respond to it. So it's just kind of like the natural evolution of time.
What are some things that maybe you'd say he shows a little bit more advanced understanding of, or maybe strengths that he has that wouldn't be obvious?
I think when we talk about the play action, the multiplicity within the play action and the ability to find ways to push the ball down the field. In the NFL, obviously defenses now more than ever are, they're paying attention to that. They're trying to stop it. And that's been going on for a couple of years now. So still finding ways to still beat that over the top is something that I notice that separates them a little bit.
So when you see the Seahawks now have added Cooper Kupp, they've added Marquez Valdez-Scantling, and they still have Jackson Smith and Jigba. First question is, Klint Kubiak ran a lot of 12 and 21. You talked about the use of fullback, tight end is an important part of their offense. What is your interpretation of that? Do you expect that still means they're going to run 12 and 21? Do you think that he's going to go more 11 personnel, bringing in those additional wide receivers?
That's a good question. I guess we'll have to wait and see. But I think the ability to do both is nice from a coaching standpoint. If defenses, say you're playing a defense that, their nickel can't really tackle well, or he doesn't want to get in the run fit. All right, well you're gonna keep the nickel on the field more. You're gonna be an 11 personnel. If you're playing a defense and when you get them into base personnel, if their Sam linebacker, for whatever reason can't guard a tight end one-on-one, or can't really get into his hook, or he just has a bad feel for the hook zone, right? And dig routes get thrown behind him. You're going to keep them in base more too. So when you have that flexibility, it allows you as a coordinator week to week to adjust your personnel to attack where the defense is weakest.
When you talked about the fullback and the advantages that it brings in terms of creating these extra gaps that defenders have to account for in run defense, but then you see in the NFL that pretty much nobody uses fullbacks anymore. Like there's very few fullbacks. I think there's like 6 fullbacks in the entire NFL. What is the kind of decision that coaches are making there when they're saying, yeah, we're going to use a fullback and we're going to go this direction, or no, we're not?
Obviously their general philosophy is probably the first point. It's expensive. I think it takes time to install these concepts. You have to really understand it. Your team has to commit to it. It has to be the identity of your team too. But at the same time, you have to have a fullback that can do all those different things. It's hard to find those guys. I know at the high school level, like it's hard to find a fullback that can do all the different things you want, to do on the chalkboard. It's hard to find tight ends that you want to do on the chalkboard, right? So it's, if you want to get into 21 or 12 personnel, you got to have the guys that can do it too. So I think it's kind of a combination of those things.
What are some of the skills you're talking about? Like all the things, what are some of the things that are generally wanting that maybe are missing in some of those fullbacks?
So you look at a guy like Kyle Juszczyk, right? All the different things the 49ers have asked him to do over the years, lead up on a Mike linebacker, lead up on a Will linebacker. Like, you have to be physical at the point of attack. You have to be willing to do that. At the same time, they run these different split zone variations where, like, he'll kind of shuffle motion. And then he'll look like he's running strong outside zone, but then he'll bend back and then block the defensive end. So you have to be nimble and agile enough to make that block and to understand the angle of that block. So you have to be an intelligent football player too to make that block. One of the main zone runs that the 49ers like to run against odd fronts is a variation called Zorro, where him and Kittle will combo the stand-up edge defender. So understanding the combination block, right now you're working on a combination block with a player, right? You're not one-on-one anymore. Now you're working on a combination with the tight end up to a safety or a cornerback. So you have to have a strong understanding of that. You have to be able to communicate that thing. And then in the pass game too, what the Niners will do is when they want to throw the ball, they'll move him out like into like a wing tight end spot. They'll even move him out wide too, to get into kind of their 5-step pass stuff. And you have to have a guy that can run routes out there. Now, they don't make him the primary in the progression. They kind of use him as kind of like a clear out, but you have to have guys that are willing to do that and able to do that. But, at the same time, do all those different blocking assignments. Because if you're just kind of a big bruiser type and the defense knows you're not getting the ball, they know you're not going to be the primary. All right, well, then they can kind of squeeze down the coverage and then bracket other receivers and not treat you as a major threat too. So when you have a player like that can kind of do all those different things, it really opens up the rest of the offense. And it allows you as a play caller to get creative with what you're doing and really attack where a defense is vulnerable. So those are some examples of all the different things a fullback has to do in the modern NFL. Well,
it would be fun if the Seahawks decide that J.J. Pegues, 325-pound defensive tackle who plays fullback and wildcat quarterback, is a good candidate in the draft. But one of the things you mentioned there, Bobby, and we're talking to Bobby Peters, who is an author and a Substack writer as well. So make sure you check him out. I'm curious, we talked about, before you got on the show, some of DK Metcalf's comments about Ryan Grubb and, some stuff that went on there. When you're game planning, how much can you incorporate feedback from players, other coaches? You have only days to prepare for your next game. How much of a challenge is that to incorporate all those different perspectives?
It's certainly a challenge. And as an offensive coordinator, you still want it to be what you want it to be, right? Like, you're still the one in charge. And if you try to get too many people's opinions and want to do what everyone else wants to do, you don't, on game day, it's hard to call the game because it's not yours anymore. So I think there's definitely a fine line, and there's just few people that understand that and can command that ability. I think that's where guys like, that might come from, whether it be the Shanahan tree or the Andy Reid tree. There's some examples over the years of guys who've come from that tree where, they understand offensive football, they understand the X's and O's, but they can't cohesively put together a game plan, pulling from their players and the other assistants to kind of make it happen on Sundays. It's definitely a challenge because you need it all to fit together and you need to keep people's egos happy. So I think having a strong understanding of people's personalities, having a strong understanding of what all blends together and being able to say it and be honest about it, and communicate that is critical.
Yeah, there's a phrase we used to use in my past life when I was working in the tech industry and we were building products. Averaging of opinions was like a awful way to do anything interesting. When you basically take a little bit of everyone's point of view and you come up with this like Frankenstein of a concept, is just rarely interesting. And so you do need the author's pen and you do need a strong point of view, but figuring out how to make people feel a part of it is interesting and tough too. So Ryan Grubb, I'm curious, how much did you look at all at the Seahawks offense last year? Because there's some people that have studied it did not have particularly good things to say about what they saw up there.
No, I did not watch much. They were on my watch list early in the season. But I've got a full-time, I've got a day job in addition to all these different football things I do. And then I've got 3 young kids now. So finding free time for watching every single offense is a pipe dream of mine at this point. But I didn't watch a ton.
Understood. So besides like Klint, Kubiak, and we'll maybe talk a little bit more about that, but what are some of the offenses right now that are play callers that have your attention that you think are doing interesting things?
Well, I just published the 2024 Minnesota Vikings Complete Offensive Manual, like you touched on earlier. Kevin O'Connell within the 5 and 7 step pass game, drop back and play action is some of the best stuff I've seen in recent years in the NFL. Blending old McVay concepts, blending newer tweaks to those concepts, but at the same time, what he did really well, like we talked about earlier, was okay. Defenses right now are kind of playing those two high shells, quarters, cover two, to try to take away all the stuff downfield. Especially when you got a guy like Justin Jefferson, right? You want to keep him bottled up. You want to keep him in front of you. You want to double team as much as you can. They still found ways to get him the ball, and they still found ways to get him the ball downfield. And that's coaching, that's design, that's offensive structure. And then what was beautiful about what they did too with him was he wasn't always the first read in the progression. They used him on the backside often to try to open up somebody else on the front side. And they did a lot of different things from that aspect. So they were a ton of fun to study from the pass game. I think usually when I write these books, I try to keep run game and pass game like 50-50. Well, with the Vikings book, it was like 70-30 in favor of the pass game, just because they did a lot of good stuff and all the concepts they did and all the different tweaks were a lot of fun to talk about.
Well, that's an interesting one to hear from as well. I was going to ask you about that anyway. Obviously, Sam Darnold has moved from Minnesota to Seattle as their starting quarterback. As you were watching that, what were your kind of takeaways about the quarterback play last year in Minnesota?
He did a really good job. Sam Darnold he did a good job of hanging in the pocket, trusting his offensive line, even when it was shaky at times, to push the ball down the field, to really make Kevin O'Connell's vision of the offense come true. They really wanted to push the ball down the field. And I think a lot of that is Sam Darnold. And that's different than the traditional Shanahan Kubiak type system. So trying to find that blend is going to be interesting. It's going to be an interesting fit. But no, he did a really good job. I think obviously the last 2 weeks of the season, he struggled. But it's hard to, if you look at the aggregate of the season, he did a fantastic job. And, if you look at any other quarterback, in the NFL, it's hard. Usually the last game of the year, isn't going to look pretty when you lose a playoff game, or, it's never going to be how you want it to end. So, no, I thought he did a great job. I thought he really positioned himself well to get the opportunity that he's going to now have in Seattle.
Yeah, well, Justin Herbert had an awful last game. You don't hear people deciding that he's not good anymore either. But so you said something there that caught my attention. That obviously the Kevin O'Connell and his offense pushing it down the field and then meshing this with, which is absolutely a strength of Sam Darnold's, meshing it with this Kubiak and Shanahan system is going to be interesting. What's behind that? Where do you think there could be some challenges for Sam Darnold that are different than what he faced in Minnesota?
Well, I think obviously not having Jefferson is going to be a challenge. But sure. Outside of that, from a scheme standpoint, I think some of the stuff is overstated, in the sense that, like, I think Kubiak can there's different buckets of there's play action stuff and there's 7-step stuff off play action that, like, Darnold did well and it kind of fits into the explosive stuff we were talking about. So finding different ways to get to that kind of, what O'Connell did was, like, he expanded and grew that, right? So, like, Kubiak's going to have to expand and grow that if they want to make that a focal point of the offense too. It's something Minnesota didn't really do well with, is run the ball. Their run game was relatively stale and relatively predictable. So I think you can help Darnold by doing that too. And I think you can kind of get to different things in the pass game if you have a better and more sound run game, right? Introducing the fullback, using different 11 personnel run game tags to kind of create better leverage for your offensive line as well. Those are things that he didn't really have last year that I think could help him, kind of fit into a new offense better.
I guess last thing here, as we're talking to Bobby Peters, you talk about running game. Offensive line has a little bit to do with running game. Seahawks have an infamously bad offensive line and has been that way for a long time. But there's been years now where people are like, man, the 49ers offensive line is trash. It's going to be their downfall. And then they end up being pretty good. Now, obviously, they have Trent Williams, who's a forever great at left tackle, but even he is starting to decay a little bit. But the point is that Kyle Shanahan's always been able to kind of mask inferior offensive linemen with his system. And I'm curious, with this outside zone, with the way that they run this, what are some ways it can help offensive linemen that maybe aren't as individually great as they would be on other teams?
It starts with having a good offensive line coach too. Being able to coach these techniques up and getting everybody on the same page. Because if you're running an outside zone based system and you can really coach up these combination blocks. You can get double teams where you need them. You can get the offensive line working up to a linebacker that might not be ahead of the play, might be behind the play, gives them better angles and leverage to do so, based on the design of the play. So if you combine those two things, you can kind of get more out of the unit. And then as well as when you have a devastating play action game off of it, the offensive line's in a better situation because now, it's easier to protect play action stuff because at first the defensive line's playing run, right? And then it takes them a few seconds to get to the quarterback, but now the routes are 10, 15 yards downfield. So it kind of gives the quarterback more time on that standpoint. And I think that's kind of what's gotten the 49ers in trouble the last year or two, or mainly this past year, is their run game has kind of fallen off a little bit for various reasons. And, the play action game has suffered a little bit too. Now they used to run a lot of these concepts that they're running off play action. They don't run them as much anymore, and they've really expanded their play action or their drop back game. And I, wrote about that this past year as well. They grew the drop back element of their game, and their pass game improved, but the overall offense felt stale or stagnant because it wasn't all cohesive, and the offensive, it kind of exposed the offensive line a little bit more. So I think when you run kind of that outside zone play action based system, you put the offensive line in a good situation. You're not asking them to, pass protect constantly. The defensive ends can't pin their ears back because they might, be getting reached on an outside zone play or, something of that sort. And having a strong screen game behind it too is critical, right? Whether it's running back slip screens, tight end filter screens, or various tunnel and slammer screens for receivers to kind of protect the offensive line too. So it all kind of works together.
Why do you think Shanahan had moved away a little bit from the run game?
That's a great question, and if I could ask him, I would. That's something that kind of, obviously Brock Purdy really emerged there end of 22 throughout 2023. So kind of featuring him more, kind of trying to get the ball out to the skill players, and I think some of it has to do with the way Brock Purdy probably sees the field, right? So like some of their concepts they were running, like their inside dig concept is a concept usually off play action, where you got like a deep dig cut and you got 3 underneath check downs that kind of distribute the hook and flat defenders in a way that opens up the dig route. If not, then the quarterback has to find those check downs with some sort of other vertical clear out on the other side. And that's usually a concept that works best off play action. Is really similar to their high cross family. Well, they started running it just off straight 7-step drop back from under center. And like, that's kind of like old school, like early 2000s, 90s football stuff. You just don't see it as often. And I think some of it was Brock Purdy really saw the field really well, just dropping back and not turning his back to the defense. I think that's some of it. But at the same time, they kind of lost their edge when it comes to the off, like you were talking about, the edge with helping the offensive line out. So no, that's a great question that if somebody has asked him, I'd love to see the press conference on that one, because that's a really good question and a really big philosophical change that happened in the 49ers offense that really kind of changed the trajectory of where it was going.
I have one more I actually thought about before I let you go, Bobby, is Sean McVay. Obviously, with Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan, there's plenty of offensive minds in the NFC West. Sean McVay has kind of moved away from some of the outside stuff and gone a little bit more to gap scheme. They've thickened up their offensive line, especially on the interior. What do you think's driving that?
Simply put, I think the too high defense, the emergence of kind of starting in kind of like that shell look that everyone's talking about. When defenses do that, and they want to play the run from too high, what they're trying to do is a lot of times they're trying to spill the ball on the perimeter. And when you're running outside zone, you're kind of pushing the ball one way or the other to the perimeter, and it kind of mucks up those cutback lanes and the defensive, through various stunts and linebacker movement and late safety rotation to spin to one high late, or using a safety to fit from depth too. It can kind of stop that. But when you run a gap scheme, you can kind of cut the defense in half, right? You have half your offensive line's blocking back. You've got a kick out, you've got a puller, or in the Rams case, you're running duo and everybody's working back. So what you're doing is you're creating a vertical seam down the middle of the defense. And that's what they don't want, because they're a gap short on the inside. So being able to block everybody else out and kind of parting the Red Sea, if you will, is a way to attack those defenses. Because against single high looks, the defense has an extra body in the box to defend that. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to create a cutback lane when you're running the outside zone stuff against single high. But too high, there's vertical lanes to be had in the defense. And if you can lean on the defense, sit on these double teams, you can find something on the interior to attack. Yeah, well, it'll be certainly interesting to see if the Seahawks are, starting a trend back in the other direction, or if they are late to the game, still going with this outside zone when you got some of the innovators like Sean McVay switching more to a gap scheme. So
Bobby, thank you so much for coming on. Folks should check you out at alertthepost.substack.com. Check out your books on Amazon. Your latest one, I think, being the 2024 Minnesota Vikings Complete Offensive Manual. Anything coming up for you on your Alert the Post Substack that people should look out for?
Yeah, so I've got so my current project that I'm working on is the 2024 Commanders offense, and this one has been an absolute blast to study their run game. It's kind of the opposite of the Vikings, where the run game is they've run everything under the sun, and they're running every different tag that you can imagine with the different gap schemes and even some of the zone stuff that they're doing. And the different ways they get Jaden and Daniels involved in the run game too has been a lot of fun to study. So that's my current project. I'm scheduling kind of like a mid-April release on that, so keep an eye out for that one. That one's been fun.
Awesome. Bobby Peters, thank you so much for coming on. Hopefully we'll have you on again, and good luck with the little ones as you juggle all these different things.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. That was Bobby Peters, recommended by our friend, Coach Cody Alexander. And great stuff there. Learning about, what's going on the offensive side, the importance of the fullback, understanding where there's been some changes for Kyle Shanahan. That was interesting as well, given what we've heard about and what we saw and observed with the 49ers last year. A lot of it was talked about with injury. That certainly was part of what was going on there. But there was also, you could just see this magnetism for Brock Purdy with Kyle Shanahan, where he just couldn't help himself but to just start passing the ball more often. And when you've got some of these drop back concepts and you do have a faulty offensive line, guess what? It starts to look not so great. And Brock Purdy by the end of last season looked like Mr. Irrelevant. Like there was a number of games where he was not playing particularly well, missing open receivers, and the offensive line just did not hold up. So it would not surprise me to see the 49ers and Kyle Shanahan get back to their roots and get back at this point in his career, given all the different, accomplishments he's had offensively. And then, hearing about Kevin O'Connell's offense in Minnesota and all the things that they did there with deep routes and shot routes, and the fact that from his perspective, Sam Darnold played really well for them last year. That's not a hot take. A lot of people feel that way, but I think a lot of people are more hesitant to credit Sam Darnold for his play and more likely to credit everything else around him. But you heard from Bobby there that Sam Darnold did a pretty good job. I think the other thing, completely unprompted, he talked about Cooper Kupp being one of the best choice route runners in the NFL, and his ability to cross leverage and to beat corners and beat secondary players and across the leverage that they're trying to force you one direction, you're able to beat them the other direction. Interesting to hear, and obviously a fun thing that he's still seeing that from Cooper Kupp. And you heard Cooper Kupp talk about that earlier this week, that he's still able to set DBs up to beat them the way that he wants to beat them. So I thought that was all really cool. Great stuff from Bobby Peters. We'll have him on more and kind of learn together as the season goes. I want to make sure on this show we're gonna we get a little bit deeper than just the superficial, but not everybody wants to get that deep. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. I certainly enjoyed meeting Bobby and hearing from him. All right, we're gonna get back, talk a little bit more about the DK Metcalf stuff. I'm gonna play you some John Schneider sound in a second. Before I do all that, make sure you give the show a like, click subscribe. Also, episode 365 coming up next Tuesday. Would love to hear some voicemails from all of you. If you want, record a voice memo on your phone, attach it to an email, send it to me at brian@hawkblogger.com, and I'll play my favorites on the show next week. Looking forward to that. Would love to hear your voices. I think everybody really enjoys hearing the voices of the people that listen to the show, not just talking to them in chat. So take an opportunity, leave a quick voicemail. It can be on any topic. It can be a question if you want. It can be just a favorite moment from this year. Anything you want to say. Would love to hear from y'all. It could be a food recommendation, a book recommendation, whatever. So also, like I said, we are closing in on 17,000 subscribers, so make sure you subscribe to the show. And finally, Mentioned this yesterday. I'll keep mentioning it, that this show, HB Mornings, is now available wherever you get your podcasts. The audio version is now available everywhere. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all those places. And that's going to stay that way. I'm going to make this available to everybody going forward. Patreon.com/hawkbloggers, where you get the ad-free version of the podcast all the time. But HB Mornings, Real Hawk Talk, now available wherever you get your podcast. So make sure you check it out. All you have to do is search for Hawk Blogger is the podcast, or HB Mornings, or Real Hawk Talk. Any of those should find the podcast. And I'd love to get you subscribed up there as well. And could really appreciate some 5-star reviews, especially Apple Podcasts, anywhere that you listen to the audio version of the pod. Take a second, give it a 5-star review. That really, really helps. It doesn't take you anything but a second to do. Means a ton to me. So if you can leave a 5-star review for the audio version, that would be great. All right. So we were talking about DK Metcalf before, and we were talking about this notion of loyalty and how the Ryan Grubb piece, it wasn't a great look for Ryan Grubb that he wasn't incorporating those guys. I don't think it's necessarily the greatest look for Mike Macdonald that he wasn't aware of this dynamic, or if he was, that he didn't do anything about it. I don't think it's a great look for John Schneider that they hadn't clearly designated this is a player we want to keep and make sure that we stay close to him. So I think there's a number of levels here that point to aspects of leadership that are not about X's and O's. They're not about just being a nice person. It's not about intelligence, at least IQ. I think it's a little bit more EQ. It's about, are you able to relate to people? Are you able to understand why they're behaving the way they're behaving? And are you investing in them? And people respond to that in different ways. And so I think I am not sure. I am not sure that there's anything that the Seahawks would have done that would have changed this outcome for DK Metcalf. I think that maybe if they had done something different for Tyler Lockett, maybe that would have changed. Maybe if they didn't move on from Pete Carroll, maybe that would have been, something like that kind of level of move. But for him individually, I'm not sure there was something that they could have done that would have changed things. And there was another part of the podcast where Marshawn Lynch is talking about this notion of, man, what's it going to take for somebody to actually finish their career in Seattle? And he went on a whole list of guys that, have not had the opportunity to finish their career in Seattle. And this is something Richard Sherman's talked about as well. Obviously, I think kind of taking some shots at John Schneider primarily, but just in general. And I 100% understand that from the player's perspective about why that is a bad look and why it doesn't reflect well on the organization. And you can point at teams like Tampa Bay with Levante David, where they just keep bringing him back, and he's going to finish his career there. But you also look at a team like the Rams, who are moving on from Cooper Kupp. You look at a team. You look at a team like the Broncos, the Colts with Peyton Manning. There's been a history of this. This is not a new thing. And from the football side of thing, from the team side of thing, if your goal is to build the best team possible and you have a hard salary cap, you do have to make these decisions about players later in their career. And the simple answer for what will it take for a player to finish their career in Seattle would be for the player to retire when they're no longer at their peak. And Tyler Lockett said he's not ready to retire. Bobby Wagner has continued to prove he was not ready to retire. And that's their right. But it's also the team's perspective of trying to figure out, well, are we going to pay $17 million to a receiver that we believe is not worth, maybe worth half that right now? And when the answer is no, they've got to look at some other options. And so I understand this from both perspectives. Personally, I would advocate, and I don't think anything like this will happen, but I would advocate for some sort of legend exception to the salary cap. and there could be some qualifications to qualify for it, like, player must have been drafted by team, player must have played at least 8 years with the team, player must have either earned a certain amount of money or had a certain amount of credentials, like maybe made a certain amount of Pro Bowls or All Pros or whatever, like Pro Bowls probably, whatever it is, something that would let teams designate, like there's franchise tags, like there's these designated things teams can do, that they could designate Tyler Lockett a legend after his 8th year or his 10th year, whatever it would be. And that those guys would actually be not counted on the cap. And you could only have one of them maybe at a time. Or maybe there's a different way it could be so it wasn't, exposed by the team. But I think that it would be a safe thing to do, because once a player's played 8 years in the league, 10 years in the league, the likelihood that they're still at their peak and the team is getting some great deal. I think quarterback is the position you have to be careful about. Like, obviously you don't want to give the team a legend slot to apply to Patrick Mahomes or Tom Brady after his 10 years, which, by the way, Tom Brady, another example of a guy that didn't finish his career with the same team. But something that would make it easier for teams to say this is just about money, it's not about cap space, and make it easier for guys to stay in one place for the rest of their career. I don't know. I think there's got to be some way that they could make it easier for teams to make a decision that I think a lot of them would want to make. On the other hand, I think it would probably expose some teams that it's not about the money. It's about, like, I want a younger guy in that slot. Like, it's time for us to move and we're going to use the money as a reason, but I want to get younger and maybe better at that position. So it's not easy. I don't claim to have the answers for all of it, but highly recommend you listen to DK on the Get Got pod. I thought it was a good listen, and there was some stuff about the Geno Smith stuff there where he talked about his connection with Geno Smith, and I interpreted it a little bit differently than others. There was this pause he had when he was talking about Geno. Well, why don't I just play it for you? I think I can play this for you. Let me get to the Geno Smith piece. Hopefully I've got it queued up reasonably well.
Pete out there in Vegas, man. It was your thoughts on Geno, man. I thought Geno was an excellent quarterback.
That's Mike Robb, by the way.
Because Geno knew what he could and couldn't do.
Right.
And when Geno got in trouble, he knew where he could, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, throw the ball up to. Just give us your thoughts on Geno. And it looks like he about to get a new contract over there too, bro.
Yeah, man, Geno, like I said, me and Geno got to Seattle the same year. So I used to bounce ideas off of Geno. Like, Geno used to help me my first couple years with DBs. Like, oh, you got so-and-so this week. Mm. Oh, yeah, I remember him when he was there. He all he does is X, Y, and Z. Like, me and Geno used to talk to each other about opposing DBs when he was the backup. Now he becomes a starter. We still had that same conversation, chemistry to where we could talk about stuff. And I knew he was going to find me. I knew he had loyalty to Locke. He was going to find Locke. Yeah. So, like, I was great having Geno as the quarterback because he knew who I was since I was a rookie. So he already knew the type of person I was. He knew I was going to play hard. He knew I was going to block hard. He knew I was going to, run the routes to the best of my ability. And he knew I wasn't going to take a play off. So,
I think that flies in the face of reports, even as recently as from Albert Breer, that there was some friction between Geno and DK Metcalf. The way DK told that story to me, and kind of watching his face and listening to him, there was a little bit of like, when Geno was the backup, we had a relationship that was different than when he was the starter. He ended up connecting the two, like, oh, it was the same, but the way that was the story started and where it was building was, we used to do that, didn't do that as much anymore. He did not say that, but that was kind of the way that story sounded like it was going until I think maybe he realized that was, he's not going to want to talk poorly about a player. I mean, he's just not. And so if he had any beef with Geno Smith, he's not going to mention it on this show. So I don't think this proves that he and Geno Smith were perfectly aligned on everything. I do think that, again, it was good to kind of hear from DK his perspective, and I don't think, even if there was friction there, I don't think those guys hated each other or anything like that. So, I don't think that's the particular reason why all this happened, but certainly certainly might have been part of kind of the overall experience. So now we're going to switch gears. We're going to listen to a little bit of sound from John Schneider, and this is on with Wyman and Bob yesterday on his show, and there's a bunch of stuff here, but I thought this little clip about the free agents, offensive line free agents. You're going to hear Bob Stelton talking about, hey, there's, you're all the best offensive linemen, you're hearing them from the analysts or one by one are gone, and you'll hear John Schneider kind of jump in, and I thought this was an interesting exchange.
The best free agent guard available. Here's the next best. And as those slowly go off the board, people are going, well, according to the analysts.
Yeah, because not every team grades all these guys the same.
Yeah.
I mean, as you see, every different analyst can grade them differently. So based on scheme fit and all that. But
so is it more about we don't see them the way these analysts do, or we talked about it a bit last week, but it's more about the belief you have in the guys that are currently here, or the
combination.
The draft is loaded.
It's really a combination. The draft is strong. It feels like a really nice group. And then we like the guys we drafted last year, the younger guys that we have in that room, and our coaches we're excited to come here and work with those guys as well. Saw an upside in them. And then also, we're at a point in free agency now where guys are we're in phase 2 really quick. And so you're figuring out, guys are trying to figure out what their market value is. And, some agents have promised a guy that they'll make at least, call it $8 million a year or whatever, $5 million a year. And the market's not telling them that. So now we're at a point where it's like, okay, guys go and visit places. And, we had, like I said, several guys in here this week. We had probably 5 guys in this week. We'll have another guy in this weekend. And then, have the docs spend time with them and keep negotiating with the agent, and have the coaches spending a bunch of time with them and seeing if it's a true fit. It's not it's not at a point where it's like, I understand and like how fans and what Dave tells me, like I understand like the empathy, like I have empathy for that, like I see it too, but you can't make chicken salad. You can't just.
I don't know the rest of that.
Yeah.
How does that go?
Yeah. You try to get me in trouble, right? No, but you can't just throw money at marginal play.
Right.
Excuse me. Sorry about that. Let me try to clear my throat again. Coughing right into the mic, blew out all your ears. Sorry about that, guys. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff there from John Schneider. So first of all, like, best players according to who, and he wanted to correct that, and he's talking about scheme fit and what works for them, and every team values different guys differently. 100%. He also talks about at the end, can't make chicken salad out of chicken what, and that's a pretty harsh statement about the quality of offensive linemen currently available, and I don't think he's wrong. And I said that yesterday, that like everyone was like, Tevin Jenkins signs with the Browns. Oh no. Like, guys, the only reason that Trey Smith was franchise tagged, like he's off the market. And after that happened, you were pretty much talking about Will Fries, Drew Dahlman, and then just a bunch of Joes. Like, and even Will Fries is like, maybe, but like he's a big projection. So none of these guys, I think if they had announced they had signed Tevin Jenkins, it would have satisfied some fans. I'm not so sure it would have made the team that much better. I'm not so sure that signing would have been good for that locker room. A guy that has injury issues, a guy that there's legitimate questions about how much he loves the game. When your coach says what he wants in the locker room is people that love ball, a guy that has tapped out of multiple games. Forget how many games he's started. Count how many games he's finished. A lot of games he starts and doesn't finish. Bears fans can tell you. So I don't know that adding that as an expensive veteran in the middle of a young offensive line would have been a good thing. And then you're talking about Lucas Patrick. You're talking about Dylan Redunz and like whoever else, Dalton Risner, like whoever else they decide to tap on. These guys are mid, like at best, players. And so, yeah, throwing a bunch of money at a mediocre player, I don't think is the answer. I'm not saying that they shouldn't spend on it. They shouldn't get somebody, and they will. But you heard him talk about the offensive linemen in the draft and that they feel like it's a strong class. And I do too. I've heard people say it's not a good interior offensive line draft. And I'm like, I don't agree. I mean, I'm not saying it's like the Quentin Nelsons of the world, but I think there's some really decent, like to good interior offensive line prospects. We've talked about them on this show plenty. So I am not excusing John Schneider for the state of the offensive line, but I am saying I completely agree that I think that they missed on the one guy that they were going after. And if you want to be critical of them not waiving the physical and signing him without the physical, that's your right. Like I think that's a defensible position to say, hey, you don't have the leg to stand on, no pun intended, to have a physical. Like, you need this guy, go get him, whatever you need to do. They didn't do that. They stuck with their principles. I would hammer them on the Joe Thuney trade and why they weren't in on that. And for my question to John Schneider about that, you got the impression that he was not given the opportunity to get back in there, that the deal happened so quickly that they weren't able to really get involved. And the fact of the matter is, Ryan Poles, the GM for the Bears, has a prior relationship with the Chiefs, and that probably greased the skids on a deal from Kansas City to Chicago. So that's it. And then the rest of this is like a bunch of crap. Like there's not another guy to go get. So I get it, but the reality is now they're stuck with what they're stuck with, plus with the draft, and then they'll get one of these guys. Whoever they choose is whoever they choose. I don't think it's worth getting excited about or feeling, they had 5 guys in for a visit. They're having one more in. We know about Tevin Jenkins. We know about Dylan Redunz. We know about Lucas Patrick. That means there's 2 guys we don't know about. I don't know if it's Shaq Mason would be a name that I would be wondering about. Obviously, Dalton Risner's a name we could be wondering about. And then the guy this weekend, don't know who that would be. So we'll learn more about those in a little bit. There's some other clips I have not heard yet, and I want to play them, and let's see, because I think there's some conversation about a player on the team that I heard about, but I didn't hear. So let's listen to John Schneider talk about what the team likes about their current roster on the offensive line.
It's like just what it is.
Right.
I wish I could tell you different.
Mm-hmm. So last time you talked about when you were in here with Mike about some of the young guys that you like.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us like who I know Jalen Sundell is kind of interesting.
Yeah, Sundell. Olu,
Christian Haynes.
Olu played great. There was he had a really nice. He got hurt, but when he got hurt, Jalen came in and played really well for him. Mm-hmm. Coaches are very confident in Jalen last year. Tawa, excuse me. Christian Haynes, Anthony. We got to get Anthony healthy, playing at a
Bradford.
consistent. Yeah, Anthony Bradford playing at a consistent level. And when that guy goes, and when he's healthy, and when he's right, that guy is like a monster. He moves people. Yeah. He can get to the second level and bury people. He's got a little Dave Weidel in him, if you will. Is that right? Dave Weidel?
Gosh. Yeah. Dave Weidel.
Yeah. I can go back with you. We could do this all day, buddy. Let's go. Yeah. No, he's got some nastiness to him, and that's what we want to be. And we want guys that can run off the ball and get to the second level, because we're going to be doing a lot of that, right?
Yeah.
I'd heard about him talking about Anthony Bradford. That's a name I have not been mentioning a lot, and I got to say, I think he's been a mess in pass protection. So yes, he definitely can be a dominating physical presence, more so than some of these other guys. But man, like, there's work to do there. If that's who you're betting on, I don't know. I've got some questions there. I will tell you something because I thought this might come up. I'm going to tell you something that you might not believe in just a second. But I am somebody who has been consistent in saying I like some of the guys they have in that room more than the average fan. I do think that the combination with a well-coached, seasoned scheme, I should say, is interesting and could make a big difference. But Anthony Bradford's a guy, he's got a long way to go for me to be excited about him. Okay, so what I was going to say about Anthony Bradford, he had the same zone run blocking grade as Lucas Patrick, as Sam Cosmi, as Aaron Banks, who just got a bag, $19 million a year last year. It's the same grade as last year. So he was a 68 graded zone run blocking lineman last year as guard. He was surprisingly much worse at gap scheme, 44 grade. So this big hulking guy was better at zone blocking. That's without John Benton getting his hands on him. And remember what I showed you in the John Benton show a little while ago, how he just lineman after lineman after lineman, he raised their game. And sometimes by like 10, 20 points in terms of their grades, whether it's run blocking or pass blocking. So, who knows? And I've said this before and I'll say it again. Anthony Bradford had some of the best athletic scoring you're going to see coming out of LSU. And I just think that he is not shown in the offseason the dedication I want to see, where he comes back with just a different body type. Like, he's got the athleticism to be much better than he is, but it's going to take him deciding that, like, if the last year didn't scare him, it should. He's on the precipice of not being a guy getting starter reps anymore and just being a backup. If he attacks this offseason, like really attacks it, then sure, throw him in the mix. Let's see what he can do. But if he's just going to be the same guy he was the last couple of years, that would be a disaster. I mean, I don't see how that could be part of your answer at that position. So those were some sights and sounds from John Schneider, from DK Metcalf, and then obviously from Coach Bobby Peters. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. Let me get to some super chats. Before I do that, just a reminder, make sure you give the show a like and click subscribe. We are up to, man, we just need 40 more people to subscribe to the channel. We'll be up at 17,000, which would be great. Would love to see you on there. And also, if you're listening to the show on an audio version, you can get this show now on audio pods. Make sure you give it a 5-star review. I would greatly appreciate it. All right, super chats. Gingerbread Man. After watching Marshawn Lynch's podcast with DK Metcalf, I don't think any CX fans should hate on DK Metcalf. I mean, I don't know that hating on DK Metcalf's worthwhile regardless. And, that is his side of the story. And I think that I'm glad he got to tell it. I don't think that he was shaping anything. I think that was his genuine perspective. And he has the right to do that. He wanted out. He's out. He said the grass is greener. He's going to find out if it is. And I wish him the best. I really do. But I also don't think that that's the full story. I guess, there's other aspects of that story that you haven't heard. And there were things on the field that weren't great. I'm not talking about the penalties. I'm talking about routes that weren't great. I'm talking about other aspects. So, yeah, I wish him nothing but the best, but I understand your perspective. Gingerbread Man back with another says, DK requested a trade because he felt disrespected. Some of us have already known this. Yeah, that's possible. I mean, I think whether it's him being disrespected or his teammates like Tyler Lockett. But he also talked about earlier in that pod about that he felt like an outsider from like they had a few guys left from the Pete time, and feeling like an outsider goes two ways. One can be you're literally made to feel like an outsider. The other is that you choose not to be part of what's going on, like what's the new change. You're kind of sitting back and watching it. And I think that there's some equal responsibility there for DK Metcalf, to be one of the best players on the team, to be a leader, and to help the transition as opposed to work against it, or at least not be totally bought into it. And so, yeah, you heard me talk about the fact that Mike McDonald, John Schneider, Ryan Grubb, like all those guys bear responsibility in saying, hey, this guy's a really good player. We care really a lot about making sure he's bought into what we're doing. They should have spent more time. They should have made sure that was a strong connection. Absolutely. But could DK Metcalf have done more? Could DK Metcalf have embraced the change as opposed to potentially resisting the change? My guess is probably yes. And so, this also just may have been an eventuality, and we don't need to blame one person or two people or anybody. This might have just been that once they decided to move on from Pete Carroll, that some of the Pete Carroll guys were going to go, and, you have to hope that the guys they bring in, like a Cooper Kupp, like a DeMarcus Lawrence, that they can be part of, filling that gap and leading this new direction. Got a little super thanks from Gray Ghost. Thank you for that. And Thomas Ish says, could Savion Williams be a DK replacement due to the Seahawks hosting him for a pre-draft visit? I don't see him at all as a DK Metcalf replacement. Savion Williams is a very different player. Now he's big, he's fast, all those kinds of things, but not a great route runner. He has an 88% contested catch rate, which I love. Really good hands. But when you have an 88%, when you have a lot of contested catches, it's because you're not getting open. I think they're very different in terms of types of receivers. I think Savion Williams, a better comparison there to me is like Cordero Patterson is kind of who I could see him as, but he could also be a Laviska Shenault, who unbelievable athlete, can do all sorts of things. He was a non-factor last year, and part of it was just who he is as a pro, like how refined was he in what he was doing. I see some of the same questions when I look at Savion Williams. So I'm glad they're looking at him. I think would be an exciting athlete to add to the mix. I think he's very different than DK Metcalf, for what it's worth. Good question though. Nate says, I'm not concerned about O-line, draft, and the Kubiak system. So I'm concerned about the offensive line. I think a lot of us are concerned about the offensive line, and we should be. Until this offensive line has given fans and the players a reason to feel like it's better than it's been, you should be very concerned. It's the same group, essentially, that you've had last year, which was, if not the worst offensive line in the NFL, one of the worst. So I think it is concerning. I do think there's reason to be hopeful. That's different than optimistic. I think there's reasons to be hopeful, but there's a lot left to be figured out with that group, and they're going to have to nail the draft. If they nail the draft, if they get the right guy, then we're in much better shape. Much better shape. If they don't, it's going to be rough. And I can't tell you how it's going to go yet. We're going to find out together. All right, folks, that will do it for episode 361 of Hawk Blogger Mornings. Make sure you give the show a like. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you leave a voicemail for episode 365. Record a voice memo on your phone. Send me a message. Send the crew, the community, a message. Attach it to an email. Send it to me at brian@hawkblogger.com. I'll play them next Tuesday for episode 365. Until then, have a great rest of your Friday. Enjoyed my time with you, and I'll see you tomorrow, hopefully with Jeff Simmons for Seahawks Saturday. Take care.